Hello and welcome back to the Locked On Oilers podcast. And last night, the Oilers and the Kings played game one of their first round matchup in the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs. And that didn't go as expected. We'll get into that and much more, and why the Oilers may have collapsed in game one on today's episode of Locked On Oilers. All that and more. Let's get into it.
You're Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome back to the Locked On Oilers podcast. I'm your host and former Oilers game day producer, Brett Holden. And last night, the Oilers could not get it done in game one. They lost 4-3. We will get all up into that business with the good, the bad, and the ugly from last night's game. Plus, we're going to look at one Edmonton Oiler who had quite the little game, even though he may not have gotten onto the score sheet. Maybe a guy to watch out for throughout this series. Plus, we will go down to Bakersfield and get some good news from down there. Yes, I know last night the Oilers did have their first playoff game at home in front of fans for a while, but it didn't exactly go as planned. So we'll get into some good news from Bakersfield there. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you find your podcast. Let's start off with last night, the Oilers losing 4-3 to the Los Angeles Kings. As I mentioned, it was the first playoff game in front of Oilers fans since 2017, since that sad series against the Anaheim Ducks. And unfortunately for the Oilers, they couldn't get their first win of the 2022 playoff season in front of those fans in game one, as they did lose 4-3. As many of the Oilers did say after their post-game press conference, as Mike Smith did say in his, Connor McDavid did say in his, and Duncan Keith said during the second and third period with Gene Principe, he thinks that the Oilers did really feed off from the fans. The fans were loud. A lot of the Oilers felt it, but as Mike Smith and as Duncan Keith said, they think that the Oilers just got a little too jumpy, just got a little too much into the crowd and couldn't quite get back into the game. And that jumpy start was obvious. We'll get into quickly the scoring summary before we get into our good and bad and the ugly. Trevor Moore started off the scoring for the LA Kings, followed by Alex Iafallo scoring for them, making it 2-0. Those happened pretty quick into the game. It did not feel like the Oilers could get into it early, and they could not crawl back. Connor McDavid scored a beautiful vintage Connor McDavid goal late in the first period to bring it back within one for the Oilers. Kailer Yamamoto then in the second period on the power play tipped one in from Duncan Keith and made it 2-2. Unfortunately, as many Oilers fans do remember from the last couple of times the LA Kings and the Edmonton Oilers have faced off, Brendan Lemieux, a name that a lot of hockey fans may also recognize as well for one of his family members, not Mario Macleod. He ended up bringing the Kings back up, making it 3-2. Then Leon Draisaitl getting a little nasty with Sean Durzi after his goal when he made it 3-3, hacked him on his way to the bench for his flyby, and then after the flyby, I gave him a little shove afterwards too. That will be something to watch for the rest of this series. But unfortunately for the Oilers, they couldn't quite get that fourth and decisive goal as Philip Deneau goes off his stomach, off of Sean Durzi's point shot, and past the Edmonton Oilers goaltender Mike Smith. As we will get into Mike Smith and that goal in a little bit, but let's get into our good, our bad, and the ugly. We'll start with the good. We'll start positive, and then the rest of this episode will basically be negative until the third period of the episode where we will get a little more positive. But let's get into the good of last night, and that was Kailer Yamamoto. Yes, Kailer Yamamoto getting his first goal of the playoffs and his first goal and his first assist, rather, as well on the Leon Draisaitl goal as well. He was the name that a lot of people have kind of mentioned that needs to be kind of show up, and including me, he was my go-to guy for the guy that needs to step up for the Oilers in the playoffs, and so far he has. Obviously, it is one game, a small sample size, but he did get a goal, did get an assist. He also managed to throw 2 hits. That little body, I swear he needs to get credited with more hits. There's no way that he only had 2 hits. Really forced the puck off defenders, really went into corners well. And as Connor McDavid mentioned in his post-game press conference, he back-checked well, which, as we know, back-check turns into forecheck, which turns into a paycheck. That was big for him. 17:49 was his time on ice, and he really took advantage of that. Early on in the game, he did kind of take, as we mentioned, the Oiler fans really made a statement early on in the game. So did Kailer Yamamoto as he took his energy penalty, I'll call it, the roughing penalty on it was Alex Iafallo. I didn't like the call. I didn't like what, or I did like what Kailer Yamamoto did, just kind of causing that energy, making sure that the Kings know that he may not be the biggest guy on the ice, but he's certainly going to be somebody that the Kings need to keep an eye on. And he's lived up to that billing as well. So that is the good for the Oilers. Let's get into the bad. And you might think you know where this one's going, but you don't quite yet. The bad was the fact that the Oilers never had the lead in last night's game against the LA Kings. They started off down 1-0. It seems like the old story for the Oilers. Couldn't get that first goal, and they just couldn't fight back into the game. It is their first regulation loss at Rogers Place in almost 17 games, excuse me. That is the longest streak the Oilers have gone without a regulation loss. Also, and then they ended up giving up another one, making it 2-0. And then they were fighting it all night long. Connor was able to make it 2-1. Then we were able to tie it up 2-2. But then immediately after, Brendan Lemieux scores, bringing the Kings right back into the lead. And they really didn't look back since. They did allow the goal for Leon Draisaitl, and then they did end up taking the lead. But it always kind of seemed like the LA Kings were just going to get that extra goal. And unfortunately, because of an error from Mike Smith, it did happen. It did happen. So with me saying that, let's get into the ugly. The ugly was, I'm sorry, Mike Smith, but it was Mike Smith. I mentioned, and so many others have mentioned, and in our episode yesterday with Sarah from Locked On Kings podcast, Mike Smith needs to be the guy even more than Kailer Yamamoto for the Oilers that really needs to step up in the playoffs. And as Mike Smith even admitted, he tried to do too much. He tried to get the puck up into the neutral zone and try and force an odd man rush, try and force some sort of quick up for the Oilers. Unfortunately, he ended up turning the puck over when Duncan Keith was over to his right, or right next to him, basically, and just dumped it into a King's body. And the Kings were able to keep the puck in the zone, which unfortunately for the Oilers led to Sean Durzee's point shot, which went off Philip Deneau into the back of the net. And that was the game for the Oilers. That was, do I need to say ugly again? For Mike Smith, 31 saves out of 35 shots. Yes, 31 saves is pretty nice, but we need to sit back and realize that he only had a .886 save percentage in last night's game. That needs to be better. Obviously, we were a big perpetuator of the love for Mike Smith, as so many of us need, or so many of us let's say media really perpetuated the Mike Smith stereotype. I was kind of the one that was like, no, he'll be okay. I'm sorry, Oilers fans. I am sorry. But we'll get into another positive for the Oilers, as there was one player that was all over the ice. He was buzzing. He was buzzing all night. How he didn't get a goal is beyond me. But first, before we get to that, our next partner has a product that I use literally every day. I started using AG1 because I needed a supplement that wasn't going to take that actually tastes great. I wasn't going to take all these pills and one that really optimizes my gut health and my immune system, and that is exactly what Athletic Greens does. So what is Athletic Greens? With one delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, your focus, and your aging. All of those things. All of those things. I've sent them to my parents and they are using them every day. I'm getting text messages from them saying, thank you so much for getting us on these, because they are helpful. It is also lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy free, or gluten free. They all have adaptive stuff for you. They're all good for you. It contains less than 1 gram of sugar with no GMOs. None of that nasty chemicals or artificial anything, really. While it still tastes good, you still get the good flavor. Normally when you hear that, you hear kind of a green powdery substance. It doesn't really sound very good. It still tastes very good from Athletic Greens. It costs you less than $3 a day, so you're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. I'm also currently still in my coffee and cold brew habit. I don't know if that's one thing I'll kick, but that's okay. Athletic Greens has over 7,000 five-star reviews and is recommended by professional athletes. Right now, it is time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It is just one scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. One scoop into a cup of water every day. It's no need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. As I mentioned, that is one of the reasons why I decided to go into Athletic Greens. There's just so many pills that you need to take to keep yourself healthy. To make it easier for yourself, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1 year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NHL network to take ownership of your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Now, speaking of insurance, this is a guy that the Oilers need to step up for them to feel good and have that little insurance going into the rest of the playoffs. And last night against the LA Kings, he was quite noticeable. No, he didn't get any goals or assists, but he was on the ice for very important times and was really making some important plays. When you go back and look at the highlights, you will see a little bit or a lot of Ryan Macleod. Yes, Ryan Macleod didn't, as I mentioned, no goals or assists for Ryan Macleod last night, as he did only end up with 12 minutes and 1 second of ice time in the game. He only accumulated 3 shots and a hit, but those 3 shots were very important shots for the Oilers. He was a guy that all night and all season, really, well, maybe not all season, because he wasn't really used under Dave Tippett, as many Oilers fans and many Oilers pundits would say. He wasn't necessarily used to the best of his capabilities under Dave Tippett, but once Jay Woodcroft came in with the Oilers, he understood how to use Ryan Macleod. He had him play for himself, or play for Woodcroft, excuse me, in Bakersfield, and he knew how to get the most of him, and he's getting the most of him even when he's not scoring. A lot of great opportunities for Ryan Macleod offensively, but it was his defensive play that I really want to shine for the Oilers. Obviously, eh, there's been a lot of talk when it comes to the Oilers penalty kill, power play, shorthanded, well, let's be real, special teams all together. Obviously, the talk will always be around the Oilers' power play with Leon and Connor, but it's the penalty kill that has been driving the Oilers. 0 for 4 for the LA Kings last night on the penalty kill, and a lot of that had to do with Ryan McLeod's energy. He caused numerous chances going back the other way on the short-handed for the Oilers. He stopped momentum for the LA Kings. And again, as we mentioned with Kailer Yamamoto, back check turns into a forecheck, turns into a paycheck. Yes, I know that is a very, very gross term. Not gross term, but very a stereotypical term, I guess, for Canadians, as some of you may know where that is from. But let's take a look at what Ryan McLeod has been able to do under Jay Woodcroft. Now, I mentioned a lot of how the Oilers played under Jay Woodcroft, and as I should, Jay Woodcroft is the coach of record for the Oilers going into the playoffs. He's the system that the Oilers are playing under right now, go in the playoffs, and those are the players who are excelling. Those are the players who are getting the most under Jay Woodcroft. We said before going into the playoffs and when Dave Tippett was the coach of the Oilers is that he's just not getting the most out of Ryan McLeod, out of Kailer Yamamoto, out of Jesse Puljujarvi, out of Evan Bouchard. And now you are under Jay Woodcroft. When Woodcroft took over on February 3rd, since he's taken over on February 3rd, Ryan McLeod has played 73 minutes and 49 seconds short-handed. Since then, the Oilers have become one of the best penalty kills, one of the better penalty kills, I should say, in the NHL. They haven't quite gotten up to one of the top, but they have been quite shut down. And obviously, if the LA Kings weren't able to generate any offense, really any momentum off of their power plays against the Oilers last night. Now, yes, they did score 4 goals and win the game, but if you are minimizing those chances on the penalty kill, that's the best for the team. Now, Ryan McLeod did play those 73 minutes and 49 seconds on the penalty kill for the Oilers under Dave Tippett, or under Jay Woodcroft, excuse me. But in total, he's played 79 minutes and 52 seconds. 79 minutes and 52 seconds. He only played less than 6 minutes on the penalty kill for the Oilers under Dave Tippett. And we realized the issues that the Oilers had on the penalty kill early in the season. I'm obviously not saying that Ryan McLeod is the reason why the Oilers penalty kill is much better, but since Woodcroft took over, Ryan McLeod is third on the team in penalty kill minutes. Third. That is also including behind Cody Ceci, who plays the most amount of penalty kill minutes on the Oilers. Before that, he was ninth on the team in penalty kill minutes. Ninth. He wasn't even on the first 2 units. How are we not sitting back here? And obviously, he's creating those chances. How are we not sitting here and going, this kid's not bad? And I know a lot of Oilers fans will sit there and be, that's not what any Oilers fans are saying. But Ryan McLeod deserves his dues. He may end up being the guy that the Oilers need in those important situations, and may end up being the guy who scores those important goals when the Oilers don't necessarily expect them to. You don't expect the Oilers to score a power play goal or a shorthanded goal when they're on the penalty kill, but he's generating those chances. And those are the plays that will end up winning a series. Look at last night for the Oilers. It was a simple mistake by Mike Smith that ended up in the back of the Oilers' net. It was a simple lapse in timing and judgment that ended up with the Brendan Lemieux goal that ended up in the back of the Oilers' net that killed the Oilers' momentum. And Ryan Macleod is one of those guys that not only creates momentum, but generates momentum, keeps it going for the next line. And the next time he's out on the ice, he keeps that momentum going. That is exactly the type of game that the Edmonton Oilers need to have if they are wanting, well, they all want to, and we Oilers fans all want the Oilers to win. But if the Oilers need or win this series, Ryan Macleod needs to be a very important proponent of this team. He was a very important proponent of Jay Woodcroft's Bakersfield Condors, who are off to the playoffs, and we'll get more into the Bakersfield Condors. As I know, the Oilers played their first playoff game in front of Oilers fans since 2017, and it was a beautiful sound and beautiful sight to see. But unfortunately, the Oilers couldn't get it done. And if the Oilers could get it done, I could have talked all day about the good things, the great things, and the even better things that the Oilers did. But they didn't. So I want to end off on a good note with the Bakersfield Condors. But first, before we get to that, let's tell you about BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL hockey playoffs. Going into last night's game, the Oilers were the favorites at minus 225. I think that's going to go down after last night's game, unfortunately, but we'll see. It is also, we are in the midst of the MLB, Major League Baseball season. They have games every day, so make sure you're checking in for those lines. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs to esports and much more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. Bet online, where the game starts. Now, where we are going to end here in the third period, as I mentioned, we're going to go down south to Bakersfield for the Bakersfield Beat Report. I mentioned, yes, I know the Oilers did play their playoff game last night, and unfortunately, it wasn't too positive for the Oilers. So we'll end on a positive note in Bakersfield, because it has been positive down in Bakersfield. In last week's Bakersfield Beat Report, we did mention that they were fighting for that home ice advantage, and they got it. They ended up getting it. They will play the Abbotsford Canucks in the first round. Now, over the last week, the Condors did play the Abbotsford Canucks. Unfortunately, they lost 4-2 in that game. In that game, Seth Griffith scored his 29th goal of the season with assists from Adam Cracknell and Cooper Marody. How about those names, Oilers fans? Also, Cracknell also got a goal in that game, his 21st of the season, from Tyler Benson. And at the time, Philip Broberg was just coming back rather, from his injury, one of his games there for Bakersfield, before getting the call up back to the big club. He ended up getting his 19th assist of the season for Broberg down there in that loss. Then the Condors on April 30th played the Stockton Heat. They won 3-1 in that game. A couple of names for the Condors getting goals. Kesselring, one of those names that we mentioned a couple weeks ago on the prospects that could end up being on the Oilers in the future. A name to possibly watch out for, Michael Kesselring. He got his 11th assist of the season in that game. James Hamblin also getting his 21st goal of the season, and Dylan Holloway getting his 14th assist of the season on Seth Griffith's 30th goal of the season, his 30th goal. And in fact, that was his 30th goal of the season, which also brought him up to 80 points on the season. Those two are Condors records, franchise records for Seth Griffith. One of those names, as I mentioned when we did talk about the Bakersfield Condors, that the Oilers were thinking of signing after Jay Woodcroft did sign on with the Oilers. Never did come up. It was rumblings if he would come up. It ended up actually being Brad Malone who came up for the Oilers from Bakersfield. And but yeah, Seth Griffith ended up getting 30 goals, 80 points, which again were those team records. Also, to wrap up the season, the Condors won 21 home games, which matches a team record. Again, when you take a look at Jay Woodcroft jumping up from Bakersfield to the NHL in Edmonton, we did see Chalk take over down in Bakersfield, and he kept the role going. Obviously, we talked about the turnover in the crease for the Condors. A lot of guys going up and down, a lot of injuries for the Condors, but he managed to keep the ship afloat. And the Condors will play the Abbotsford Canucks in the first round of the AHL playoffs. That kicks off tonight on in the AHL. All three games between the Condors and the Canucks will be played in Bakersfield. It is a 3-game series, best of 3 in that. So all 3 games will be played in Bakersfield. Tuesday, as I mentioned, that is tonight, they will play. Wednesday, tomorrow night, they will play. And next Monday, which is May 9th, will be played. All 3 of those games, again, will be played in Bakersfield. So if you're in the Bakersfield area, go on and cheer those Condors on, and potentially future Oilers as well. That is where we will wrap up today. I'm sorry, oil country. I wish we could have a happier Tuesday, but the Oilers and the Kings are back at it tomorrow night at Rogers Place. 8 o'clock is when the coverage will start, probably around 8:10, 8:15 puck drop after everything gets going at Rogers Place. Rogers Place, let's get loud once again. Let's help those Oilers bring back a 1-1 even series to LA, and then we get a game 5 here in Edmonton where we can be just as loud. I shall see you tomorrow on Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen. Now for your next listen, make sure you tune into Locked On NHL, from the first round matchups to every Stanley Cup kiss. Locked On NHL covers the playoffs like no other. Hear the latest news and opinions from local experts every Monday through Friday. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Once you are there and you hear our recap, unfortunately, yes, I know we will be sad, but hopefully Wednesday's recap won't be as sad. Once again, the Oilers and the Kings on Wednesday at 8 o'clock in Edmonton. We shall see you tomorrow. We'll see you soon. Stay safe.